Bills Mafia, what's going on? Happy Wednesday, hump day edition of First and Five. I'm flying solo today, and it's a topic that I needed to cover. Obviously, the Bills wide receiving room has been polarizing since I'd say March. We're going on about 10 months here of polarizing positional group. Everything that you could imagine could happen to this position group has happened. You could even go back to last season. The Bills had to make adjustments in season with, trading for Amari Cooper and stuff like that. But I kind of want to break down the timeline, right? And I know it's been talked about, probably way too much, right? Over the course of the season. We all know about what happened with Brandon Beane going on WGR and giving his opinion on the roster, the wide receiver roster, obviously. And we all know about that. We've all seen what's transpired this season. We've all seen the Bills have struggles with guys getting separation, guys getting open, guys being consistent, guys being available in the lineup. The Bills seem to have issues with consistently being able to give jerseys to guys on game days more than 1 or 2 weeks in a row. So I'm gonna talk about all of that, and then I kind of want to talk about why I think it's not such a huge issue right now where they're at with the loss of Gabe Davis and Tyrell Shavers. Yes, Tyrell Shavers I feel like is a pretty big deal because of what he brings in the blocking aspect, and he's just a dog. I'm sure everybody's seen the clips that are out there now of him playing the game with a torn ACL. Obviously, we don't know the severity, but either way, it's a torn ACL, and he's blocking guys downfield. The tush push that got the Bills the lead late in the game, you can see him just pushing guys downfield. So I want to get into all of it. So if you guys could like the video, that would be great. I would have really appreciated that. Would support me and Built in Buffalo, what we're doing here on all of our platforms. If you guys could share this wherever you're watching it. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We greatly appreciate it. We're trying to get back to a normal schedule, routine of growing that platform. Like, comment. Let's get the chat going. I know it's a Wednesday afternoon. It's kind of a midday thing, but this is something I wanted to get on and talk about before the week progresses, because there's been a little bit of movement with the Bills wide receiver roster. There hasn't been anything official as of when I started this at 1:30, so maybe something will break later today. But let's take it back. Let's take it back because I have to say, quite honestly, I think that a lot of folks were pretty critical of the Bills wide receiver roster last season. A lot of fans knew there wasn't a ton of money to spend going into free agency. If there was going to be a guy, it had to be the one. There'd have to be one guy that was affordable, that was the right fit, right? So in March, the Bills signed Joshua Palmer, a guy that a lot of the data analyst, content creators were clamoring for, because he's a guy that he may not have gaudy stats, but he was a guy that got separation. He made some plays downfield, and he was consistent, right? You look at how his career went with the Chargers. Everybody said, he's not getting an opportunity. He's third or fourth on the pecking order when it comes to receptions and targets and playing time and snaps and all that stuff. So the Bills give Joshua Palmer a pretty healthy contract, over 11 mil per if you do the AAV on that. So I think that made some folks happy, because we talked about all last year about how nobody was open. There was just no separation, right? So the data analysts and the stat geeks and the film nerds all said, well, this is a perfect fit. This is a guy that we didn't have last year. He consistently gets open for 3 years with, in LA. He's a good fit. So I think that Brandon Beane made the right decision. I think that Joshua Palmer can be a valuable asset in this Bills passing game when healthy. Again, when healthy. Your best ability is your availability, right? So you can't knock Joshua Palmer for getting injured. I do truly feel like he did like playing he does like being in Buffalo, playing here close to where he's home and from Toronto and stuff like that. All right. So Joshua Palmer, Bills big swing at free agency wide receiver with the money that they had, obviously. So then you go into the draft, and I think a lot of folks were sitting there thinking, all right, they're probably going to go heavy defense because Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott heard every offseason or every postseason about how the defense isn't the issue, right? The offense isn't the issue. It's been the defense. So Brandon Beane, I think, had a philosophy that maybe if there's a guy there on early day 2, maybe we take a look at it. But I feel like defense was the priority. And Brandon Beane came out and said that after the draft, that defense was the priority. We needed to get better in defense. So that's what we did. We focused heavily on the defense. So the Bills did take Caden Prather in the 7th round, ultimately didn't make the roster after training camp. So that was kind of like a throw a dart and see what happens. You know, if you get something cool, maybe you get a practice squad guy that can develop, but obviously no longer on the team. So after the draft, that's when Brandon Beane kind of went on his like just tirade about we scored 30 points. 8 games in a row last year. You know, we led the NFL or we were second in the NFL in scoring, and Josh Allen was the MVP. And look at what we did with what he had. We're bringing guys back and all this stuff. Now, this is after losing Mac Hollins to the Patriots, who I think a lot of Bills fans thought Mac Hollins was just a perfect fit for the bring your lunch to work every day, blue collar mentality of a wide receiver that he was. He was a guy that started out as just a special teams guy, was running routes, was doing blocking. Then as the season progressed, his role just grew because Josh could trust him and he was making big plays. We saw in the AFC Championship game, he had that big touchdown catch before halftime. That was a huge play. So he walked. I'm not sure where, you know, you can hear different stories depending on who you talk to about he wanted to play for the Patriots. He wanted to play for the Bills. The Bills didn't offer him enough money. The Patriots offered him the same amount of money, but more years. So whatever. So they lose a guy in Mac Hollins, who I feel like was a guy that I don't want to say he was a glue guy, but I think that he was a guy that was, you could trust him to do the right things weekly, right? Similar to Tyrell Shavers, right? He was a guy that you can trust on to, he's going to help run, block, he's going to help on special teams, and if you need plays, he's going to make plays occasionally. So then obviously Beane goes in there and he has this tangent on WGR, and you know, the same day the Bills sign Elijah Moore. I don't know if it's a coincidence. I don't know if it was already in the plans, if he had already talked to the Bills, you know, and they said maybe during the draft, if something doesn't happen, we're going to grab you. But Elijah Moore seemed like a dude that would be a good fit. Another guy that people talked about, you know, his 2 stops with the Jets and with the Browns, he didn't have really good high-level quarterback play. You know, maybe the Bills can unlock something with him. Well, come to find out, he was inactive several times. I'm not sure if the Bills just didn't trust him knowing the playbook. They didn't like what they saw during practice. I'm not quite sure why it didn't work out with Elijah Moore, because I was rooting for him. I thought coming out of the draft that he was going to be a really good wide receiver in the NFL, and it just never panned out. And obviously, he's now on the Denver Broncos practice squad, which is kind of funny. So then the Bills go into, okay, so they got Elijah Moore, and then obviously they re-signed Gabe Davis to the practice squad. And a lot of fans were 50-50 on the Gabe Davis signing, because Jacksonville let him go. He was recovering from an injury that was going to put him out for a little bit of time starting the regular season. A lot of fans were upset. Why are we keep bringing back these old players? Because obviously at this point, the Bills had already brought back Jordan Phillips and Jordan Poyer and things like that. So Gabe Davis, practice squad guy, he kind of hangs out there for a little while. The Bills release Elijah Moore after being game day inactive a couple times. It just doesn't work out. So Elijah Moore is now off the Bills roster. Then the Bills sign Mecole Hardman to the practice squad. Then he's elevated. He gets 1 game. He fumbles a punt return. He gets 1 deep shot from Josh. The Bills release him. Or he got injured. The Bills put him, out on injury reserve, and then they release him, right? Or he wasn't on IR, he was injured, and then the Bills released him. It was the Mecole Hardman thing was just it was a weird situation. Like I don't know if the fumble was an issue. I don't know, but so he was released. The Bills eventually brought him back recently to the practice squad, where he is currently on the Bills practice squad. So we get to the trade deadline, and Brandon Beane doesn't make a move. We hear all the stories about what happened with Jalen Waddle. Beane mentions it in a press conference, doesn't mention him by name, but says he was in on an AFC East rival team that was ready to deal a wide receiver, but the Bills package wasn't going to be enough for the Miami Dolphins. Turns out that Miami wanted a 2026 first rounder. Brandon Beane offered a 2027 first rounder. It didn't happen. There was other receivers like Jacoby Myers and some other guys that were linked to the Bills all throughout that process, right? So what do the Bills do? They end up signing Brandon Cooks, who asked for his release from the Saints. So they bring in Brandon Cooks, a speedster, a guy who still has the juice to get downfield and kind of take the top off of defenses. And he's still currently obviously on the roster. Curtis Samuel, obviously in and out of the roster or in and out of the lineup all season, inactive a few games here. He kind of traded off with Elijah Moore with who's going to be active this week and who's going to be inactive this week. Obviously, he gets injured. He gets put on injured reserve. Joshua Palmer gets injured. He's been in and out of the lineup for the last half of the season, battling with injuries. He's put on injury reserve, which kind of stinks because I feel like during the Falcons game, I feel like Josh Allen and Palmer kind of had something going. Like I feel like that trust was starting to build, that rapport was starting to build. So Joshua Palmer's put on IR. Then obviously the Bills go into Jacksonville. Oh, well, let me talk about Keon Coleman first, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Keon Coleman. So obviously we all know about what's going on with Keon Coleman, right? He had the huge game against the Ravens. Everybody was saying that this is going to be a breakout year. Look at this game. He had 9 receptions. I believe he had over 100 yards, some crucial catches on third down in that game. He had that game-sealing reception that put the Bills right in field goal position. But then as things progress, we start seeing things where all the internet sleuths are dropping film clips of Keon Coleman from All 22 jogging down sideline. You know, on plays where he's not part of the play, but he's just kind of not giving it 100%. And then we hear things about him missing meetings. And then we hear things about him just not going 100% in practice. And then we see things again on film. And then the Bills, all right, you're inactive. And then the Bills had a short week, so he was inactive again. Here recently, he was inactive. The Bills went with guys that they thought were going to do what they wanted him to do for the game plan for that week. But Keon plays last week, has a nice reception, a big play at that part of the game. So Keon Coleman, I think, is the wild card. And I'm going to save my overall summary of Keon Coleman kind of towards the end because he ties in with what I want to talk about with what the Bills can look at going forward. So obviously this past Sunday happens, and Gabe Davis, if you like him or not, Gabe Davis played a few games, was inactive for a couple games, and played some more games. Obviously, he had that nice touchdown in the Jets game, which that the Bills backups were playing in that game against the Jets. It's the Jets, say what you want. But Gabe Davis, to me, I like his game where he is a physical wide receiver. Now, say what you want about hands and his drops and things like that. I feel like Josh trusted him. So, you know, if he was asked to run a Joe Brady route, he was going to run a Joe Brady route, which is basically you're just kind of out there as a pawn. You're not really doing anything. You're just going out there running down the field to take, you know, coverage away from whatever else the Bills are trying to do. And I felt like Gabe Davis brought somewhat of a veteran presence to that, you know, to the Bills locker room. He's been in big games, right, in the postseason. He had that massive game against the Chiefs in the 13 seconds game. He's been there before. So obviously Tyrell Shavers gets a torn ACL. I don't know the severity of it, but it stinks for this guy because he's just the blueprint of what Sean McDermott would want from not just a player, but a wide receiver, right? He doesn't ask questions. He does whatever he's designed to do on a play. If it's running 30 yards downfield to be a decoy, if it's helping chip and run a route, if it's helping in the run game, whatever it is, he's been asked to do. Obviously, the special teams aspect of it. So it kind of stinks for him because I feel like getting an ACL injury in January kind of stinks because I feel like he's going to miss part of next season, if not the whole thing, right? I mean, everybody's ACL heals differently, and there's different, levels to what kind of, or different grades to what kind of an ACL it is. I saw pictures of Gabe Davis's ACL, and that looks bad. His whole knee looked like it ballooned up. So I don't know what that means for Gabe, obviously, after this season's over, going forward, because this is his second injury in 2 years. But Tyrell Shavers, man, it's kind of stinks because I feel like he was one of those guys that he had some good moments this year where, he had the game against the Buccaneers where he had a really big game. And then, a couple weeks ago, he had a couple big catches in those games that were important. So in the Eagles game, so we'll see what happens there. But I say all that to say this is what the Bills, with all these guys in and out of the roster and all these players that are now on injured reserve or out for the season, or the Bills have released. So the three main guys that obviously are still Bills players that are on injured reserve. So Joshua Palmer, and I dug up some stats. Joshua Palmer this season, the whole season, doesn't include the playoff game against, obviously he didn't play against the Jaguars. So this is weeks 1 through 18. He had 37 targets, 22 receptions, 300 yards, 303 yards to be exact, 0 touchdowns, right? Tyrell Shavers had 23 targets, 15 receptions, 245 yards, and 1 touchdown. Gabe Davis had 18 targets, 12 receptions, 129 yards, and that 1 touchdown that he had came against the Jets when Mitch Trubisky was the quarterback in a throwaway game for the Bills just in week 18 while they were resting most of their starters. So I say all that to they're losing 2 touchdowns, right, from the whole season. They're losing, I'd say, about 600 yards of receiving yards from those 3 guys. So we have to, when we think about what the Bills are losing going forward, because obviously Joshua Palmer was never going to be part of the equation after he was put on IR. He's probably done for the year. I don't think that even if they open his 21-day window that the Bills are going to rush him back to play if the Bills win this week in the AFC Championship game, or if the Bills make the Super Bowl, he's going to be available to play. So you look at Shavers and Gabe Davis, right? So you lost throughout the course of the entire season, 15 and 12 receptions. We're looking at under 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. But what you are losing is the blocking ability. What you are losing is the special teams ability. What you are losing is continuity of being in the lineup with Tyrell Shavers. He was available every week, right? We've talked about how this. I just laid it all out here with the fluctuating roster that Josh has had to try to have guys run routes that he doesn't even know if they're going to be in the lineup next week or the week after, or if it's the same guys that were in the lineup the previous game or whatever. And I feel like that's a hindrance to this offense. And I feel like that's why we've seen times this year where the passing game just looks unorganized. It looks out of structure. And we've gotten on Josh a lot. And I've gotten on him too about bailing on pockets, not trusting what his eyes are seeing, just not being in lockstep with some of these guys. But you have to remember too, he's had all these guys in and out of the lineup. Throughout practice, throughout the week, he's got different guys running routes. He's got Joe Brady dialing up stuff for one guy, and then the next week, if they dial that up, it might not work because this guy can get separation and this guy can't get separation. This guy's a speedster. This guy's just a big body target. So, you have all these elements that I don't feel like get talked about enough. We bitch and complain about separation. We bitch and complain, nobody's open. Nobody's open. Well, you got to remember, Josh, other than 𝐾𝐨𝐴, who else has been there every week that can get open? And 𝐾𝐨𝐴 is not your deep downfield threat, right? Tyrell Shavers has been there, but for some reason, he's not thrown into those positions. He was against the Buccaneers and a couple times sprinkled in here and there, but it's like there's been no consistency. And I feel like we don't talk about that when we say the Bills' passing offense has looked bad. For a huge chunk of this season, the Bills' passing offense was Josh runs around, a guy hopefully comes back and they make a play. Now, there has been games when you get Dalton Kincaid involved and you get 𝐾𝐨𝐿 involved the right way, where the passing games look good. This past Sunday, Josh Allen completes 80% of his passes. The passing game looks fairly good. He's hit a couple times. He's only sacked once. But here we go, though, with now 2 of those receivers going into Denver are not available. So now we have to rely on other guys. So let's talk about what we have. And I appreciate all the guys in the comments. I'm not ignoring your comments. I got a lot I want to talk about. And I just kind of want to, I don't want to harp on the wide receiver position. I don't want to just keep beating a dead horse, because we all know that this is a position that needs a huge upgrade and a huge overhaul this offseason. But I want to talk about how we got here and where we can go moving forward, because I think that's important. I think it's important to talk about, yes, they're down to 3 active wide receivers, but I don't think it's the end of the world. I really don't. I feel like, yes, there's continuity. Yes, they're going to have to find someone else to be a gunner on special teams for Tyrell Shavers. And yes, they're going to have to find another big-bodied guy to go block downfield and ask, do all the dirty work and play the 111th and run the Joe Brady routes and stuff like that. So let's look at what the Bills do have, okay? The Bills do have 𝐾𝐨𝐿. Josh targeted him 12 times last week. He had 12 receptions. It wasn't gaudy yards. He had 82 yards. It wasn't these massive yards, but they asked him to make receptions, be reliable, and that's what he was. The bubble screens and the little screens that we all hate and we scream at the television when we're watching the games, that was an extension of the run game, because James Cook was hitting a wall every time they were trying to force the run game. There was a couple times when it was, a 4 or 5 yard pickup, but when it's 2nd and 8 or 2nd and 9 or 2nd and 11 or 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8, these were extensions of the run game. And 𝐾𝐨𝐿, if we like that they rely on him to make a bunch of guys miss and spin around and do gymnastics and stuff to get yards after the catch, he's going to do that. The Bills have that at their disposal. We may not like it, but if it's 2nd and 7 and you get a 5-yard pass completion, it's the same as running the ball for 5 yards. We may not like it, but I feel like as time progresses here, I feel like there's going to be more things that are going to be installed. I'm not saying Joe Brady has a magic bag that he's going to pull out, because he's limited with his skill set players, but I feel like using 𝐾𝐨𝐿 the way they have was reliable, right? So we have 𝐾𝐨𝐿. Dalton Kincaid popped up again with a calf injury on the injury report. After he scored the touchdown against the Jags and he went down and he had to be helped up, I said to a bunch of people in our group chat, I said, he's hurt again. And now he was probably playing hurt, and he's probably been playing hurt for the better part of 2 or 3 months now. But if you look at what he gave the Bills this year, even as inconsistent as he was being available on Sundays, 39 receptions, 571 yards, 5 touchdowns, 49 targets, right? Let's remember that number, 49 targets. So he's not a wide receiver, obviously, but he is probably the Bills and should be the Bills' number 1 target moving forward. If he's available and he can get reps, that's the guy that you want down the field to make plays for this offense. He has to be available. Dawson Knox is available. Again, 49 targets this year for Dawson Knox, 36 receptions, 417 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So between Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, they both had 49 targets this year. Kincaid had 39 receptions. Knox had 36 receptions. They both had over 400 yards. Kincaid had over 500. Kincaid had 5 touchdowns. Knox had 4. He should have had 5 on that one that obviously we don't want to talk about, the one that he dropped that would have got Josh's 40th touchdown this season, but we won't go there. So you have those guys. And if you look at the Bills, if you just look at the Bills receiving stats, right? I know games aren't driven by just like box score watching, but number 1 receiver in targets, receptions, yards, 𝐾𝐨𝐿 available. Number 2 in targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns, Dalton Kincaid. Number 3 in targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns, Dawson Knox. Those 3 guys are all available Saturday versus the Broncos. And hopefully those guys will be available for this run, however long that is. So we have to remember that we have those guys. We may not want to rely on forcing passes to Dawson Knox, but the guy all season long, I think he's been slept on. I feel like there's been times when it's the Bills need a big play. It's a 3rd and 10, and it's a play in a crunch situation, and Josh finds Knox, and he makes the catch. So we can't forget about that. If you look at just the Jaguars game, if you look at the Bills' top 5 receivers yards-wise, it was 𝐿 Shakir, who's available, Brandon Cooks, who's available, Keon Coleman, who's available, Dawson Knox, and Dalton Kincaid. And those guys are all going to be available on Sunday or Saturday. The thing is, who do you replace the Gabe Davis targets, the Gabe Davis targets and the Tyrell Shavers targets / practice squad, or targets / special teams / blocking routes, all that stuff that Tyrell Shavers does. So there's some options, obviously. You know, you have Curtis Samuel, who I think has been ready to go for a while. They just put him on a 4-week IR so that he could, you know, just so that the Bills could have a roster spot. You know, you put Curtis Samuel on IR because I believe he was injured for 2 to 3 weeks. And if he's good to go, then you start eyeing it. Okay, like maybe if we need him, he's here. He's ready to roll. So this opens up a roster spot throughout that 2 to 3 week window that the Bills can add a player, right? So now I feel like you look at Curtis Samuel, who, by the way, was full in practice yesterday. He'll probably be full, hopefully, in practice today. So I feel like that's a no-brainer. Obviously, he hasn't played football in a while. So he's going to get up. He is going to have to get up to speed real quick. And, you know, he made that big play against Denver last year. I understand Denver's a different team, but he made a big play for the Bills in the postseason. So there's some experience that comes along with elevating him from IR and activating him again. I'm not overly thrilled with how the Bills use Curtis Samuel. I'm not overly thrilled with how Joe Brady has tried to do things with him, but hopefully we can get him some routes and let him let him run some stuff in the route tree and see what's there. I feel like there's more than just a jet sweep and just throw a little screen or a little outlet pass. I think there's more to Curtis Samuel than what obviously availability is he hasn't been available for most of the season, which kind of has bled over from last year. And then very interesting to see who the 5th guy would be. I don't think they're going to sign a street free agent. I really don't. I feel like it's going to be somebody that's in the building. Now, they just brought Christian Wilkerson back to the practice squad, who's been here before. He has playing time experience in the NFL. I think he has 3 touchdowns in like 2 or 3 games played. So he has some NFL experience. He is that big body guy that could replace the Gabe Davis / Tyrell Shavers, do the dirty work, run a Joe Brady route, get your hands dirty on in the run game, stuff like that. Not saying you would give him a ton of targets, but I liked what I saw from him in training camp. I thought that he was essentially another, I don't want to say another Tyrell Shavers, but he was a guy that I felt like there was some promise there. He's a little bit older. He's not, 22, 23. He's a little bit older, so he's got some experience. He's been through NFL practices, training camps, off seasons. He's been on different teams. So, and the Bills have had him in the building. So that's something to look forward to. And then obviously you have Mecole Hardman, who's still on the practice squad. I don't know if that's a guy that they're going to elevate. They have the speed with Brandon Cooks. They have, Keon Coleman, who's a guy that they're probably going to start forcing passes to. They're going to have to. So I don't know, they don't need him in the return game because this time in the postseason, obviously you've had Ray Davis all year, but this time in the postseason on punt returns, they're going to put Shakir back there. And it's not for Shakir to rip off a 40-yard punt return. It's for, I know he's going to catch it. I can trust Khalil Shakir to catch a ball or get a fair catch, and not let a ball roll into an end zone or something like that. So it's going to be interesting to see. Again, I don't want to harp too much and beat a dead horse about this wide receiving roster, but I can't remember a time in my 30 plus years of being a Bills fan that I've seen any position group go through this much turnover, but yet have the Bills be a successful winning team. We complain about the pass game looks horrible. We say that what's wrong with Josh? And we put a lot on Josh. I feel like this year he's gotten a lot of criticism, and rightfully so. There's been a lot of stuff that is not on the wide receivers, and there's a lot of stuff that's not on the play calling. There's a lot of stuff that Josh has done this year to not have continuity, but it all comes back to trust. It all comes back to putting guys in position to be successful. And like I said, the guys that made plays against Jacksonville are all playing on Sunday or Saturday. The guys that made receptions, made big catches. The Brandon Cooks reception was huge. That set up that Bills touchdown. He's playing Saturday. Dalton Kincaid had a touchdown. Hopefully, cross my fingers, he's healthy and he's playing on Saturday. Dawson Knox had a big catch against the Jaguars. He's playing. He's playing on Saturday. 𝐬𝐲𝐫𝐿 had 12 receptions. He's playing on Saturday. So we have to look at it past. We just don't have pass catchers. We have to look at what are these guys asked to do on a game in, game out basis. So it's not fun having two practice squad call-ups start in a game that's in the divisional round of the AFC playoffs. It's just not. I get that. But I feel like the Bills can work through it. I feel like Josh Allen's going to be able to figure it out. There was a game this year against the Kansas City Chiefs. Say what you want about how the Kansas City Chiefs finished their season. There was a game where the Bills got James Cook heavily involved. They targeted Dalton Kincaid multiple times down the field, and 𝐸𝐿 was a big part of the passing game. And if that's the recipe and that's what the Bills can live with and they can get by on, then that's what's going to happen. I feel like the biggest key, though, is if the Bills can establish the run. If the Bills can establish the run on the Broncos, I think that's going to be huge to what they'll be able to have to do and have to worry about in the passing game. Because if you establish the run, maybe you can add in some play action passing, get guys moving around and get Josh in space. And I feel like the Bills can do that. Now, I don't think that it's long-term, like something's going to need to be figured out this offseason. There's going to have to be, like I started the show saying, there's going to have to be an overhaul in this roster offensively. As far as the skill position players, mainly wide receiver. And obviously the Bills are going to have to do things because the cap's going to go up, but they're still going to be up against it. And we're going to have to see. And Josh Allen is going to have to trust the guys that he's practicing with this week. He's going to have to trust the guys that are going to be running the routes, and either it's going to work or it's not. It's that simple, right? Trust what has gotten you to this point this far. Dalton Kincaid, 𝐸𝐿, James Cook, and maybe sprinkle in some Brandon Cooks when you need a deep shot. So I appreciate everybody that's watching. We got over 600 in here between X, Facebook, and YouTube. If you guys would, if you haven't already, please smash the like button. If you like what we're doing here at Built in Buffalo, if you like what I'm doing with First and Five, I'm just getting this podcast started. I've kind of sprinkled it in throughout the season. I'm going to do more and more as obviously the playoffs progress. Hopefully we can do more and more content next week talking about the Bills heading to the AFC Championship game. Smash the like button, please. I appreciate it. That goes a long way to support what we do. I appreciate you guys. If you're watching this after the fact, or even if you're watching it now, put your score predictions in there. Oh yeah, I saw some comments about Keon Coleman. I haven't forgotten about Keon Coleman. Excuse me. I feel like Keon Coleman, there's like he's like a weird, just the aura around him is just odd, and it's just he's hard to get a beat on. If he wants to go 100%, if he likes playing in Buffalo, if he's given it his all, like I can't tell. I honestly can't tell because I watched the Jacksonville game several times now. I watched the All-22 several times. That great reception that he had. Great play. But then if you you look at in the second half when the Bills weren't targeting him, he's like jogging on routes. Like you can tell he's not running, which, okay, fine. You're not getting the ball. You're not part of the progression in that route. But if you watch Tyrell Shavers on routes that he's not getting the ball, he's sprinting downfield. He's giving it his all. Now, I don't know if that's the difference between the mentality of a guy who's fighting to stay on this roster as a practice squad, undrafted free agent that the Bills have had in this building for a couple of years. Had one game last year that he was on the active roster. It was that throwaway game against the Jets last year where he had that big play. Made the roster this year, has been fighting all year to stay on that roster, has impressed a ton of people with his ability to block, play special teams. He had a couple games where he made some really big plays in the pass game. And then you have Keon Coleman, 33rd pick in the draft, essentially a late first round pick if you want, because I feel like if the Bills were going to pick in the first round, they probably would have chosen him. They chose to take him on day 2, 33rd pick in the draft, a guy who we thought had a letdown year last year coming back after the injury, didn't do much in the postseason. Had one game this year where he was like, oh, Keon's arrived. He was benched for missing meetings or being late to meetings. He was inactive a couple other times. Like, I don't understand the mentality. I'm trying to figure it out. I saw something come out yesterday saying that he's willing to do anything, and he has been doing anything that's been asked of him. He can make the plays. This is coming from Keon, of course. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect from Keon Coleman. Like I said last week, I put a comment in one of my group chats that I'm in. I said either Keon's going to have a big play or Keon's going to have a big drop in a big moment. And he had a big play. So I don't know. It's just the inconsistency, obviously, of him being in the lineup. It's the inconsistency, I think, of the Bills trying to figure out who he is as a receiver, where he belongs, and where he fits best in the scheme. When's the best time to use him? Where's the best time to line him up? So we're going to have to see, because he's obviously going to get playing time. He's obviously going to get reps, and he's obviously going to get targets this week. So we'll see what happens. But I hope, going forward, whether it be just for this game, whether it be the rest of the playoffs, how far the Bills go, or if he plans on being on this roster next season, because I honestly don't know. Honestly, I don't. After all the stuff that's transpired this season with him being inactive for 3 games, with him not putting effort in on routes and not doing what's asked of him, I honestly don't know where to go. So we'll see what happens. But I appreciate all you guys watching. Like I said, I got over 600 people in here between all the platforms. I'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you guys more of some injury updates because the Bills obviously they had a walkthrough yesterday. They're a day ahead of their typical weekly practice schedule because the game's on Saturday, which sucks. I wish they played on Sunday. Josh is banged up. A lot of the other guys are banged up. The injury list was pretty long, but I'll kind of go over some injury reports tomorrow. Should be around the same time, around 1:30 Eastern time. I'll be back. But I appreciate all the support that you guys, have given here today. All the comments, the comment section was going crazy. So I appreciate each and every one of you guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow. As always, go Bills.